Hey everyone, welcome on. And I want to introduce you to some of the leaders of our Workday practice, people who are hands on, day in and day out, sleeves rolled up, working with some of our schools that are at some stage of their Workday journey, right? And gang, the reason I wanted you on as we get ready for Educause, because you'll be there, I just want to pick your brain on the things you're seeing in the market, right? In the trenches with the clients. What are some of the challenges they're experiencing? What even got them to raise their hand and ask for help? What are some tips you have for them? And what would be a couple good reasons for them to come people to come spend a few minutes with you at Educause? So that's what I want to work through. But for now, let's just set the table with what's kind of the state of affairs with the schools that you're working with. Let's start with you, Liz, that are going through their Workday student transformation.
Yeah, I think schools are doing a really nice job of recognizing what a big lift new ERP system is, and that it
Yeah.
is takes a lot of manpower. It takes a lot of knowledge and understanding of not only the product, but your internal processes, and also what your future looks like and where you're trying to go. What kind of institution are you? What's happening within your community? What shifts have been created since COVID, right, for your institution? So
Hmm.
it's really nice to see schools recognizing that they need more help than just their system integrator, that they need internal help. They need folks who can help them with the knowledge, the language, understanding how to transform their process, how that's going to fit into a new ERP. So I'm super excited to see folks who are recognizing that and then going out and finding people like Beyond, people with experience like Lauren, Nick, and I in implementing particular products and helping with leadership and strategy and transformation.
Lauren, you've been on the system integrator side, right? And you've been deploying a product like Workday that's a great product, but schools find themselves for some reason in having a gap in knowledge, gap in information, gap in know-how. What, even with the great methodology Workday has and what the system integrator brings to the table, where do you see the gap where schools are stumbling or stubbing their toe? What are some of the areas where there's some blind spots for them typically?
See, there's three, if I would really
Okay.
look at it, right? One is sometimes underestimating the effort that it actually takes for their team to contribute to the project. A lot of them, they're still doing their regular jobs. They're not necessarily having full backfill. And while you say, oh, it's 50% of the project, 50% in your office never really gives you up 50%, right? They still need you that much. And I think there's an underestimation of that. And folks are very committed to the students and what they want to do. So they get burned out. And these are
Hmm.
marathon projects, right? This is not something you're going to do in 6 months or 9 months. It's probably close to 2 years. And so there's a lot expected from clients. And I don't think they really are ready for that full marathon. The second area, which is, I think anybody in higher ed would agree to this, we're not big on making fast decisions. We
Hmm.
need consensus. We need to go out and get everybody to agree and things like that. And when you're doing your implementation, you need to be able to make fast
It's
decisions.
go, 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 right? Yeah.
Right, because there's a timeline, there's a window. If you miss your window, it's another year before you can come back in. So having that quick decision making ability, empowering your people on the teams maybe to make some unilateral decisions and not have to go through 16 layers of governance, I think is one of the other areas. And that's number two. And I think number three is the willingness to rethink your current state process. Like Liz was talking about, really thinking future state, because when you go to cloud, there are going to be some constraints of what the
Sure.
product can or cannot do. And schools are coming off of highly customized homegrown systems or legacy systems where they could really touch the code and make massive modifications. When you go to cloud, it's flexible, but it's not so flexible that it bends to everybody.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things, kind of goes back to the decision making. You might have to change how you get to your destination, and that's where I think sometimes, where Beyond can help ahead of time, as we talk about. And, sometimes your SI can help with that. But really depends on who you pick, right? As your
But
SI
they
and
got
what
so
they're,
much on their plate, right? They got to knock out
they
a
do.
bunch of stuff at the same time. Liz, one more question for you before we go to Nick to talk about project management and things that go well and don't go so well in deploying the project. One of the areas I've sensed from hearing from some of you and even talking to clients where there seems to be a lot of ambiguity is people understanding the Workday methodology, right? They see it, they read it, but then they're like, but how do I translate it to my world? Do you find yourself spending a lot of time kind of educating on how the work sets work and how to prepare and how
Yeah.
to prepare for the next meet. Like, just talk us through that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And having sat on the client side, I completely understand. So happy to talk to people at Educause about what that really feels like from the client side. And it is really tough. When you work in higher ed, your job tends to be repeatable on an annual basis, right? There's just things you
Mm-hmm.
do at given times every single year. So either you find comfort in that when you work in higher ed. As long I worked there 20 years, there was a comfort in that. You knew what you were doing every day when you came in. These projects are incredibly ambiguous, even with the best plans in the entire world. And Nick will kind of lay a lot of that stuff out for us, but they're extremely ambiguous. And so I think what we try to do is help people to understand that ambiguity is okay. Processes are iterative. Decisions are not final, right? And it's hard to,
Mm.
I've heard SI say, well, we're going to pencil this decision in, and nobody really believes that, right? It's like, no, but
They all
get
freak
your
out.
eraser out.
Yeah.
So I think really what somebody on the inside could help do, as well as then reinforced by the SI, is to say, this is really ambiguous and what you're feeling is completely okay. And the process is iterative. Works at A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. It's a very iterative. We're building on it. We're not trying to do a big bang in the first 6 months of the project. So we do a lot of that work through,
Education, right? And
beyond, and with our
coaching.
client. Yeah.
And Nick,
Reinforcement.
because you're our project management guru, what are some things you see are go well at schools on the project management side? And what are some things that go south? And how do you kind of make sure you're on the good path versus the not so good path?
Sure. I think it starts with defining what the project is. We've said the project several times, even in this conversation, but it's usually through the lens of the student information system, any product that may be, but really that's a piece of the project for the institution. So your SI is going to come in with a focus on Workday, and they're going to do a great job with that. But there's everything else that integrates to it, and they're even going to help you with those integrations. But each of those integrations requires change within those additional systems. So from an institutional perspective, your project is much larger than just the system that the majority of your team is focusing on. So the schools that are doing the best with this are looking at it as a truly holistic project, seeing how the change affects not just your SIS, but every system it interacts with, and what the user experience, student experience, staff experience is going to be with not just the SIS, but all of those additional systems.
You may have to yell a little bit louder for us, Nick, on the next one. But
Fair
Lauren,
enough.
as you're hearing Liz and Nick's thoughts and all the
Mhm.
projects you've led, again, any thoughts you want to share with people as they're in it already, they're doing a Workday deployment, or are thinking about moving to the cloud? Any tips, insights, or some things they should come tap you on the shoulder at Educause and ask you about that you'd be happy to share with them?
Totally. For schools that have not started anything in Workday yet, specifically, but even going to cloud, right? There
Yeah.
may be an assist that they know is kind of reaching end of life, things like that. I think it's great to come in and go, what could we do now to be prepared? And there
Mm.
are clients out there that are doing some of that work, either while they're doing their HCM Fin deployment or prior, to look and I'll say clean house, right? I kind of imagine
Mm.
when you pack and you're going to move, one of the first things you should do, you go through your house and you start throwing out the junk and really looking at what you have and going through things. So I think it's a great time to do that. If you're already on your journey and your school is implementing HCM and finance, make sure you as the student team, you're involved. And I think that's something
Mm.
you can talk to Liz and myself about. We can tell you, hey, there are some key areas you really should be involved in with your HCM and finance. You should care how they're setting it up, because when you start your student journey, you're either going to have to rework it, or
Oh, got
you're
it.
going to have
Okay.
arguments, right, with HR or with finance on how they configured it to work great for them. And you're looking going, it doesn't support what we're doing on the student side, whether it's work study, the academic calendar, and how you're, conducting classes, how courses are set up, locations. I mean, a
Mm.
ton of things we could go through with you. I think either of those two, right? And again,
Are
it's not
great.
too late to reevaluate and maybe improve where you are and start getting ready, cleaning house for when you're ready to start student, whether you have a
And Liz, I
timeline
know
for
to
that.
that point, Liz, you're a big fan of kind of having techno-functional teams come together early, innovate together, don't do this in silos. Is that kind of one of your big warnings is to people is in that area?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we can't do this in a silo, especially with a product like Workday, which it prides itself on sitting on a single line of code, right? And that makes perfect sense. There are still some pretty high firewalls that exist between HCM, Fin, and student that I think surprise people. We can help with identifying where those gaps are and where you might need an integration. But to Lauren's point, if you are not in the room sitting down having a conversation about the chart of accounts or how work tags are going to be utilized in finance or how HCM is going to set up locations or set up personal information, set up calendars to Lauren's point, you're going to have serious issues with your work study, your faculty academic pay, just getting paid,
Mm.
right? A lot of people don't think about that. So you really you do yourself a huge service by bringing everybody to the table at the appropriate times. We're not saying that folks sitting on the student side need to sit in on every single meeting, but at the appropriate decision points they should be brought in. And that just goes to how, what Nick brings up with project management. You have to have a project management team that understands the continuity across the entire product and not just a project team for platform and then a project team for student. You really should have continuity across your project management team.
And Nick, the project management team, where is it best seated? Is it best seated inside the IT department, or is it best seated somewhere else? Like, what's your thought on that? What have you observed as a good practice or a best practice?
Sure. I've seen it all. So, a PMO can really sit anywhere. So I'm not dodging the question, but I will answer by a good PMO is going to take into account all their stakeholders, regardless of where it sits. So they're going to have a strong voice from academics. They're going to have a strong voice from IT. They're going to have a strong voice from the instructors. They're going to have student representation. And you can do that well anywhere you put them in an org chart. But the focus
But
has
to
to
your
be on
point, the voices have to be there, right? That's
voices.
your point.
That is the number one most critical part. And sometimes, depending on your organization, that may be better in IT. It may be better in an academic organization. But at the end of the day, it's the voices. And you can literally do that anywhere within your org structure. And I would always emphasize that the people are where they're going to make the project work, not where they sit in your organization.
Nick, made a really, really sound point. It is about the voices across the organization. But I think the mistake we see often is that higher ed, again, is still very much siloed, even from a budget perspective. So it will be, well, we have X dollars for a project, but the budget for A, B, and C live here, and the budget for C, D, F, G live over here. And ABC only owns the project management budget, right? Or something like that. And so then it becomes who has the loudest voice because they tend to own that space. So, I agree with Nick wholeheartedly, but at the same time, you have to have a leadership structure that says project management works for everybody. There is no one person. They don't roll to the CIO. They don't roll to the provost. They don't roll to the president. They're one voice for the entire organization. I was at an organization that brought somebody in actually from the outside to run the entire project, because then all of those relationships and politics, they didn't have any place because that person had never worked at the institution before. So
Closing thoughts from each of you.
Yeah.
Start with Lauren.
I think there's one other area that's really the new area that they can also talk to us about. And that is, I'm already live on Workday Student. Where do I go from here? How do I maintain what I have? But how do I grow, right? Because Workday is continually evolving. We get those releases twice a year, and lots of new functionality has dropped, especially if you've implemented 2-3 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago. Have you kept up? And where are you going on your journey going forward? I think a lot of schools just take that breath after going live, like, whew. And then the PMO team, as we talked about, kind of gets disbanded. And then the boat doesn't go anywhere. It's just bobbing along in the water. And you really need to continue to have a captain driving forward the new features, the new functionality. And I think that's something else that, ask us about. What can we do going forward as well? So I'd add that as my last thought.
That's great. Liz, closing thoughts?
Yeah.
Anything we missed?
It goes to that techno-functional conversation that you asked earlier. Your folks are now techno-functional, right? This cloud application allows them to maintain their own system. There's always a place for IT. No one's ever going to say that there isn't a place for them. But I think it's a much more cohesive relationship. My other piece would be is, come up to us, come up to me. I was part of the design partnership. I have a really vested interest in seeing folks who go live on Workday be extremely successful. And I love and have been doing research on sort of the most successful way to do this since the early 2010s. And what Lauren and I talked about, being part of HCM Fin, having continuity with HCM Fin, participating in student, I've found over the years that leads to the most successful projects. So come have a conversation with us. We want to see you be extremely successful. That's why we're here.
That's awesome. Closing thoughts from you, Nick?
Sure. Yes, as we talk through a lot of the kind of put a project management hat on, a lot of this sounds very procedural, but the reality is there's a lot of organic things that happen in the project team or a lot of really great processes that are just missing that one thing. So just echoing what Lauren and Liz said, come talk to us. Let's help you find that one thing that might push that process over the edge into being the perfect process or the one that really engages your team, because there's a lot of good ideas out there, but they do have to be catered to the team that you have on the ground at any given time. And even by facing projects. So what works now may not work in the last year of your project as the team's anxiety levels and stressors and environment changes around them. So being flexible and looking for what's going to work for the team is always a great conversation to have.
That sounds great. So yeah, but bottom line is, how do we move this whole experience you're about to have or are having from kind of transactional to transformational for your institution? All right, gang, thank you so much. And for those of you that are coming to Educause, tap one of these on the shoulder and have a good conversation. Make it a great day.
See you soon.